The moment that envelope hit the table, I knew my life was about to split into a before and an after. I didn't know how, yet I just felt it in my gut, that quiet, uncomfortable pressure that says, pay attention. This is one of those moments. Inside was cash, more money than I'd seen in one place in years, sitting there like it didn't care who I was or how badly I needed it. And the wild part, nobody was watching. No cameras, no coworkers, no boss breathing down my neck. Just me, a near-empty restaurant, and a choice that felt way heavier than it should have. Let me back up a little, because this didn't start with the money. It started years earlier with being invisible. My name's Marin Cole. At the time, I was a server at a place called Harbor and Vine, one of those upscale spots in Seattle where people talked about investments louder than they talked about their kids. I'd been there almost 4 years, long enough to know which customers snapped their fingers, which ones never tipped, and which ones looked right through you like you were part of the furniture. My manager, Rick, treated the staff like we were replaceable screws in a cheap machine. Smile more, walk faster, don't talk back, that kind of thing. You know the type. I was a single mom with a 9-year-old son, Leo. Smart kid, big heart asthma that loved to flare up at the worst possible times. Medical bills lived on my kitchen counter. Past due notices were basically my roommates. So when people talk about doing the right thing like it's easy, I always wonder if they've ever had to choose between morality and groceries. That night was dragging. Late reservations, too much wine, not enough patience. Near closing, a man sat alone in the corner booth. Expensive suit, expensive watch, eyes glued to his phone like it was holding his soul hostage. His name, I'd later learn, was Grant Holloway. Tech founder. Sold a company. Worth more money than I could even imagine. But in that booth, he didn't look powerful. He looked wrecked. His hand shook when he lifted his glass. I heard him whisper into the phone, "Are you sure then, after a pause, I'm on my way?" His voice cracked on the last word. He ordered without looking at the menu. Barely touched the food. When I dropped the check, he waved me off, already standing, already halfway out the door while still on the call. 10 minutes later, I went to clear the table and saw it. A thick envelope tucked under the edge of the plate. I opened it just enough to see the cash. Hundreds. A lot of them. Way more than the bill, way more than any tip. My heart started pounding so hard I thought Rick would hear it from the bar. I stood there frozen. This wasn't generosity. This was distraction. Pain. A mistake. And suddenly my brain was doing math it hadn't done in years. Rent, inhalers, groceries, school shoes Leo had outgrown. This money could fix things at least for a while, and no one would ever know. Rick was in the office drinking. The other servers were gone. The cameras in that section had been busted for weeks. It was almost funny how perfectly wrong the situation was. That's when Rick walked by, glanced at the table, and smirked. "Lucky night, huh?" he said. "Guy like that won't miss it." He didn't even slow down. Just kept walking like the decision had already been made for me. But I couldn't shake the image of Grant's face. The way his shoulders slumped. The way he said, "I'm on my way." Whatever was waiting for him wasn't good, and something about taking money from that kind of moment felt wrong. Not illegal, wrong. Soul wrong. I folded the envelope, hands shaking, and tucked it into my bag. Not to keep it, to return it. Rick laughed when I told him I was clocking out. "You're nuts," he said. "People like him don't do favors for people like us." That line stuck with me. People like us. I drove to the hospital I'd heard Grant mention on the phone. St. Alders Medical Center. The parking garage smelled like rain and oil. Inside, everything was too bright, too clean, that particular kind of quiet that hums with fear. I told the nurse at the desk why I was there. She looked skeptical, then tired, then finally nodded and said she'd see if he could step out. When Grant walked toward me down that hallway, he looked 10 years older than he had in the restaurant. Tie gone, eyes red like he'd been crying and trying not to. He stopped when he saw me. "You followed me?" he asked. Not angry, just stunned. "You left this," I said, holding out the envelope. "I figured you might need it." He opened it, stared inside, then looked at me like I'd just spoken a different language. "Most people wouldn't have done this," he said quietly. I know I said, but it wasn't a tip. That's when he told me about his daughter. Car accident. ICU. Waiting on scans. Words no parent ever wants to hear. I told him about Leo, about the asthma, about how sometimes I lay awake counting his breaths. We stood there, two strangers bound by that awful shared understanding that loving someone means being permanently vulnerable. He tried to give me the money again. I shook my head. That's not why I'm here. Before he went back, he asked for my name. Then he gave me his card. Personal number written on the back. If you ever need anything, he said. I nodded, not expecting it to mean much. People say things when they're scared. I went home that night broke and exhausted, second-guessing myself with every mile. But when Leo fell asleep on my chest, his breathing steady, I felt lighter than I had in months. Like I hadn't sold a piece of myself to survive. 3 days later, Rick called me into the office mid-shift. He looked annoyed. "There's some guy here asking for you," he said. "Won't leave." Grant was standing by the host stand, smiling like the sun had finally come back up. "She's awake," he said the second he saw me. "My daughter. She's going to be okay." I cried right there, didn't even try to stop it. We stepped outside. He told me he'd been thinking about me about that night, about the choice I made when no one was watching. "I run companies full of people who talk about integrity," he said. "But you lived it." Then he handed me another envelope. Not cash, a job offer. Operations assistant. Salary that made my knees weak. Health insurance that covered my son. I laughed at first, told him he had the wrong person. Rick was watching through the window, arms crossed, already irritated. Grant shook his head. "I have a lot of smart people," he said. "What I don't have is someone I know I can trust." I took the job. Rick barely hid his satisfaction when I quit. "You won't last," he said. "That world eats people like you alive." Turns out he was wrong. My first weeks were brutal. I felt out of place, underdressed, underestimated. People assumed I was there to take notes and stay quiet. And I did stay quiet. I listened. I watched. Years of being ignored had trained me well. I noticed who interrupted who avoided questions, who smiled when numbers didn't add up. During one meeting, a senior exec named Calvin dismissed my suggestion without looking at me. "We'll stick to the plan," he said, smirking. Later, when the data proved I was right, Grant asked me privately what else I'd noticed. I told him everything. A week later, Calvin was gone. Fraud, cooked numbers. The room shifted after that. People stopped smiling at me, started watching me instead. And, for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I was a threat. Grant pulled me aside one evening and said, "You know, this won't make you popular." I told him I wasn't there to be liked. I was there to do the right thing. Funny how that answer used to make me powerless, and now it made me dangerous. A year later, I stood in a conference room looking out over the city, thinking about that envelope on the table at Harbor and Vine, about how close I came to choosing the easy thing. People still argue about stories like this, about whether I was stupid to give the money back or lucky or naive. So let me ask you, if you were standing there alone with no one watching, bills piling up, and a chance to make your life easier in one quiet, dishonest moment, what would you do? Would you take it? Would you walk away? Or would you do something that scares you because it feels right? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know where you draw the line and why.